Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be checking out the Nazgul5 6S Freestyle model. Now, if you are a regular subscriber to the channel, then you'll know that my favourite bind and fly freestyle model is the SkyStars Starlord. This one's a little beat up because it's been my main rig since I got it, but I do have a couple of backups because that's how much I like it. However, the iFlight Nazgul is absolutely superb. I don't think I can even pick between the two. And just to add salt to the wound, iFlight have beaten me. You see, ever since Eachine released the 6S X220 HV Wizard and it was death rolling out of the sky, I said that I think I could build a better model for the same price. So I bought all of the parts, which I'll actually list in the below, but things got in the way, such as commitments to other projects. So iFlight have come out with this model which comes pre-built, and it's around about the same price as the Eachine Wizard HV, if not cheaper, and just oozes quality. This one is definitely going to be coming along on my freestyle adventures with me. Now, funnily enough, at the making of this video, you can only seem to get the Nazgul from Banggood in a 4S and a 6S version, despite it being an iFlight product. Perhaps iFlight haven't updated their website with it yet. But I'm really struggling with the name Nazgul because the model itself is an accumulation of iFlight products put into a bind and fly model. For example, the frame is the iFlight XL5 V4, and it's important to know that because first of all, the model doesn't come with a GoPro mount. You have to buy it separately, which you can only buy from the iFlight website, and the V4 mounts are different than the V3 mounts, so be careful with that. And yes, I've had to succumb to the Hero 7 because all of my Session 5s have all died. Now, my biggest worry moving to the Hero 7 is its fragility compared to the Session 5. But there are no worries with this mount because it has a lip to protect the settings screen, and it's got a removable protector for the lens. It even comes with a protector that also houses an ND8 filter. Now, spoiler alert, once you use my tune with this model, you aren't even going to need an ND filter. But I have got to say I'm super impressed with this mount, and it sits about 30 to 35 degrees, which gets the props out of shot using super view. Anyways, more about the frame. So it's kind of a true X with 5mm arms. I think the V3 had 4mm arms. If I turn it on its side, it does look like a stretched X, but the difference between this frame and the V3 is that it will take a 5.1-inch propeller. So I guess they have elongated the arms to accommodate for that. The arms are individual and locked into place between two beveled sandwich plates. In fact, I think all of the carbon has been beveled or chamfered, whichever word you prefer. And despite all of these changes, the new frame weighs just 108 grams against the 126 grams of the old V3 frame. Now, not that it matters because this is a bind and fly. The previous version of this frame didn't have 20 by 20 mounting holes, and this one does. It looks like the rest of the TPU parts do come with the model though, so we have them around the arms as well as at the front and the back of the frame. And the camera is actually mounted in TPU, but that's really just an adapter to make a smaller camera fit the bigger frame. I'm not a fan of using TPU to mount CMOS cameras, but spoiler alert, you don't get any jello from it. Then the SMA pigtail, along with the receiver's antennas and the receiver itself, all has its own custom 3D printed mount. So yeah, I can't compete with that. The Starlord does have one over the Nazgul here though. The TPU beneath the arms has the screws recessed, so you can skid and grind along the floor, whereas the screws are bare on the Nazgul, so a couple of heavy landings or skids on concrete and it's going to be rough for those screws. You're also given a choice of a silicone mat to stop your LiPo from slipping, or a foam pad. Now, don't go with the foam pad, it's just going to throw your battery in a crash. And we also have this high quality LiPo strap which threads through the top plate, and you are given 2 of those to make sure that the LiPo is going nowhere, although it only comes with 1 fitted out of the box. So onto the motors, and they are the Sing E2207 1800 kV naked bottom motor. Now, even though there's no mention of it, I'm going to assume that E stands for economy, with them costing around about $13 compared to the $32 high-end versions. But I tell you what, you would not notice it. They run smooth as anything, and my usual choice for a freestyle motor would be a 2306 stator rather than a 2207, because I tend to find the 2306 stator motors give a smoother flight, but that is not the case with this model. It flies buttery smooth. Now, Banggood is listing the 6S motor as 1700 kV, so I guess that is a typo. But iFlight do make this motor in a 1700 kV version, so maybe they decided to change it after they published the specs to Banggood. And 1800 kV is actually quite high for a 6S model, especially a freestyle one. So if I convert that to a 4S voltage, it would be a 2700 kV motor, which is more of a high RPM racing motor. But then again, the 4S version of this model comes with a 2750 kV motor, so they are clearly going for high RPMs with this guy, and spoiler alert, it works. So onto the propellers, and this is where I think the name Nazgul comes from. The Nazgul props have been around for a long time, but not these ones. I think Nazgul has got something to do with Lord of the Rings, but these props are the perfect match for this model. They are a really thin prop, making them lightweight, so they really scream at high throttle, but somehow they don't lack any power whatsoever. They are spec'd as a 5140 prop, and even though these days the last 2 digits don't usually have any bearing on how much thrust the prop produces, but you can physically see that they are low in pitch. They have really put thought into this model, and the build quality is astonishing for the price, even down to the neatly placed black tape to keep the motor wires nice and straight. So onto the stack, and again it's iFlight's own Success EF4, which again I'm assuming is their economy stack, consisting of a 4-in-1 D-Shot 600 capable BL Heli S ESC board, which is rated to 45 amps and can obviously take up to a 6S voltage. The Starlord has it beat with its 32-bit ESCs, however, the Starlord isn't available with 6S motors, and its ESCs can only handle up to 5S. But with the Starlord only being a 4S model, there is less filtering needed, because a higher voltage tends to cause more noise, so there is no need for an external capacitor with the Starlord. So I guess there are pros and cons to each, because the iFlight ESCs do have an external capacitor, but in my opinion it's just not quite big enough at just 200 microfarads and rated to 35 volts. Ideally with 6S you want a capacitor rated to double that of the input voltage, because our modern ESCs do something called motor braking, which causes voltage spikes, and on a 6S setup those spikes can reach up to 50 volts, and this capacitor is only rated to 35 volts. So what happens if the rating is not enough? Well, they get hot first of all, and they actually have a cross section at the back designed for if they explode, but I don't think that is going to be the case with this one. It's also better to have a larger capacitor, because you can think of a capacitor as being a small battery which temporarily stores energy, creating a kind of buffer, so that when these voltage spikes occur, the capacitor's stored energy smooths out the voltage, which reduces noise to the flight controller as well as the video feed. It's important to note though that an external capacitor is a patch for not having enough filtering on the ESC itself, which is difficult with these 4-in-1 ESC boards because there isn't a lot of room to mount stuff. So most high-end ESCs have rows of ceramic capacitors because they are small in size and do a good job at filtering these voltage spikes. And looking at this ESC board, there are rows and rows of these capacitors, so they haven't cheaped out, even though this is apparently the economy version. So as well as the small capacitor, we have an overly thick 12 gauge wire attached to the terminals, along with an XT60 connector, which conveniently pokes out of the back. I've mentioned this before, but 6S draws less current, so 14 gauge wire would have done the trick, but 12 gauge wire isn't going to do any harm other than being a little bit heavier. Everything is also soft mounted from the ESC board to the flight controller, which is an F4, and this is where I think the component choice of my 6S freestyle build would have been an advantage over this one, because my choice of stack is the Airbot F4 along with the Typhoon 32-bit ESCs, and that's because it has a built-in 8-volt regulator for your VTX, which adds another layer of filtering, resulting in zero video noise. And I know this is the case because the HobbyMate models came with this system and the video feed was crystal clear. The Success Flight Controller only has a 5-volt regulator, although it is rated to 3 amps, which might be enough to power everything along with a 5-volt Unify, but this model doesn't come with a 5-volt Unify, and the VTX that it does come with requires 7 volts and above, so it will be running directly off the VBAT and therefore will be susceptible to any noise that the ESC and capacitor can't filter out. It's come flash with Betaflight version 4.04 with the target as Betaflight F4, and it's got 2 spare UARTs, with the other 2 being taken up by the receiver and the tramp protocol for the VTX. It needed what I would call a fair amount of setup, but considering the price of this thing, I can forgive it, and I'll put my CLI in the description of this video if you wish to use it. The first important thing to take note of is that it's running props out, so make sure that you've got the props on the right way, or you can uncheck the props out option, but my setup was done with props out because I wanted to try and fly it stock, but it just wasn't happening, so I ended up tuning it in the field with props out. I've changed the digital idle speed to 8. It was set to 5.5 out of the box. However, when I armed the quad, the model was idling too low for my liking. Perhaps it's something to do with 6S and them being lower kV motors and it idling lower, but I didn't want any death rolls with this one, and setting it to 8 suited the model well. The personalization is set to XL5 V4, confirming to me that this is a model to showcase iFlight's components, but that's okay. I've changed the arming angle from 25 to 180, so if you decide to use my settings, then don't carry your copter with the battery plugged in, as well as your transmitter turned on, otherwise you might accidentally hit the arming switch and you'll be making a trip to the hospital. Air mode was turned off, so unless you want your model to act like this at 0 throttle, then that needs turning on. The power and battery was set to the stock values of 3.5 volts and 3.3 volts per cell. I've changed this to 3.2 volts because despite 6S being more efficient, I'm expecting voltage sag on long punch outs with those high RPM motors, and I don't like the warnings flashing at me. They did have a go at a PID tune, bless them, but for me it flew like a soggy sandwich that had been left in a lunchbox for a few days. So here are my PIDs. I worked an entire day on them, so if you find them useful, then you can give me some love on Patreon, which I'll also link in the video description below. I did experiment with the filters, switching from biquad to PT1, which did send the motors a little warmer than before, but not enough for me to be concerned. However, biquad flew fine and I couldn't tell the difference, so I might just leave it as that in my CLI dump for you guys, because messing with the filtering can burn up your motors, so I try and stay away from that with my tunes, and you get enough death threats doing what I do as it is. In the receiver tab, I added 5 to the RC deadband to stop any trim drift from my transmitter feeding through, and the RSSI was set to disabled, but this is the Bind and Fly XM Plus version, and they have flashed it with the RSSI firmware on the auxiliary 12, so I gotta give some credit to iFlight there. I just don't know why they didn't enable it, so I just turned it on. The modes tab had everything there, such as arming, angle, acro, and lost model alarm, which is done via D-Shock commands because there's no physical buzzer. However, they had them all in different positions and on different auxiliary channels, so I moved those around. The on-screen display had warnings turned on for all 3 profiles, so I removed that because I don't find them helpful. The icons are a little high up for my liking. I dropped them down lower, and I also removed the average cell voltage and replaced it with the flight time because that wasn't selected, and it's really important for these reviews to know how much flight time the model gets. But it does have the VTX channel icon selected, which is essential for me. The personalization is randomly off to one side, so the OCD in me would put that in the middle. I'd also removed the milliamp drawn, and I also had to add the RSSI icon. And for the end screen, I've turned max speed off as there's no GPS. I had a quick peek in the LED tab and there was some setup in there, but the model doesn't have any LEDs, and this is something that the Star-Lord does have. Now, I was never a big fan of LEDs until I started flying freestyle with other people. It's a great way to follow each other, and that's another plus for the Star-Lord. So above the flight controller is one of my favorite budget VTXs, because even when you throw a load of noise at it, you only get a few lines in the video feed. So with decent filtering, you get noise-free video. iFlight make it themselves, and it has pit mode and is power switchable via the tramp protocol, as you saw from the setup, and switches from 25 milliwatts up to 600 milliwatt. It also has a button on it to change the settings, but as always, just change the channel and power through the on-screen display. The button's at the back as well, so it's really hard to get to. It uses a pigtail MMCX connector, which attaches to this iFlight branded right hand polarized antenna. It's got a 3D printed grip around the connector, which looks suspiciously like Painless 360's design, but I'm not going to be accusing anybody of anything there. There are a few products and designs like this to make sure that your antenna is nice and tight. I thought it wouldn't be quite long enough to clear the battery, but if you look at the angle the quad flies at, then it just about does. So along with its small footprint, I approve. As I mentioned earlier, this is the XM Plus version, but you can also get it with an RXSR, or there is a no receiver option. So with those 2 spare UARTs, there are no limits to what receiver you can use, apart from ones running off 3 volt. So make sure you Spectrum guys are running a 5 volt receiver so you can really embrace those fail safes. I'm just messing with you. The XM Plus has come flashed with the international version of the firmware, so if you are a member of the LBT community, you'll have to reflash it. The receiver doesn't power up from the USB, so you have to plug your battery in to bind it. It comes with these straws to house the receiver's antenna, and lastly we have the camera up front, which is the 2.1mm version of the Cadex Ratel using their Turbo Eye glass lens. Now, when I reviewed this camera in the past, the 2.1mm version had a 4x3 sensor, so when you put it into 16:9 mode you lost vertical field of view, so be aware of that. They give you the controller board to change the settings lens of the camera, but the extension cable isn't plugged in, so you would either need a pair of fine tweezers or take it apart to get at it. Now, Banggood's website lists the Starlord as having a Runcam Swift Micro CCD camera, but again, this must be an incorrect listing because I bought one 2 weeks ago and it arrived yesterday with the same Cadex Turbo S1 camera, although unfortunately they don't seem to have connected camera controls this time, whereas my first one from GearBest had it set up through the flight controller. So I'll have to investigate why that is, even though I don't really use the feature. You get a bunch of spare screws along with some iFlight stickers. There is no battery, of course, so I've tuned it with the GMB 1100 6S and also the Tattoo R-Line 1050 mAh. My favourite is the GMB 1100 mAh though, because with it being a bigger capacity, it can provide more current, so it sags less and you get a longer flight time without compromising the power. Its dry weight without a GoPro is 389 grams, and then with a GoPro it comes to 506 grams. With the 1100 mAh GMB 6S LiPo it weighs 713 grams, and it's 678 grams with the Tattoo R-Line 1050 mAh LiPo. And before any of you weight guys get triggered by those figures, I hate to repeat myself, but you want a freestyle model to be heavy. It's the weight that cuts through the air and prop wash to give ultra smooth video. And I'll use the same analogy as I always do. What is going to be more affected by the air, a brick or a feather? Okay, let's go for a line of sight with this guy. Just starting off here in angle mode to make sure that everything is okay, and it seems to be. Okay, so let's flick it into acro. Not hearing any oscillations. Let's go for a punch out. Wow, this thing is noisy with those low pitch props. Yeah, a little bit antisocial, this one. But it's flying nice. Plenty of power. It's gonna have some nice smooth footage with my tune that I put on it. Just too sloppy out of the box for me. Yeah, this thing is very noisy. Just have a listen at this. Now, the mic on this GoPro probably doesn't do it justice because I think it has a limiter on it to stop it from clipping. But it is very noisy. Plenty of power though for a model that has got such low pitch props, and that's probably the high kV that it results in, or should I say RPM, when you apply a 6S voltage. But yeah, this is a fast one, this. Looking forward to doing some FPV with it. So let's bring it in and do just that. So starting off with some DVR footage because it is such a gloomy day and the FPV camera is picking up the dynamic range much better than the GoPro. Look at those grey clouds there, that pretty much sums up our summer, and if I switch to the HD footage, you will just see darkness because the greyness in the clouds is just matching the exposure of the ground, and everything is just really dark. But as you can see, this thing flies on rails, and just look how quick it is. It could be a race copter. I estimate that it's doing 90 miles per hour there. But of course, you don't always have to be on the throttle. And you'll notice that we do have just a couple of lines of interference on the FPV feed, but you know, this is kind of what you get with 6S. When I reviewed the EMAX Buzz 6S, there was a significant amount of noise compared to the 4S version. And with this, I think it isn't bad at all. You're just getting the odd line across. It's not like it's debilitating. In fact, you can't even see that it's there sometimes. I just think it needs just a slightly bigger capacitor with a higher rated voltage, and I think it'd be golden. But yeah, having an absolute blast with this thing. It is so smooth, and I'm flying in conditions here where I was flying those, you know, the cine whoops that were being blown about all over the place, you know, 15 mile per hour wind, and you would not notice it with this guy. So impressed with it, and it's definitely going to be a model that I'm going to be keeping on my backpack, and I'm even going to consider adding crossfire to it, I think, and do some modifications, because it is a superb model. And it's really difficult to pick between this and the Star-Lord. I think both of them are equal to me. You know, if I want to fly 4S, I'll pick up the Star-Lord. If I want to fly 6S, I'll pick up this guy. And that's pretty much the end of it. But just testing out my tune there, you can see that we've got nice snappy rolls and also backflips. But you can see that the voltage is dropping and it's now flashing. I should be landing, but I'm having too much fun. That is the problem with 6S, it just drops off a cliff. But we've got a 3-minute flight time there, so I'm going to come in for a landing. I'll put a link in the description if you wish to get one. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.